we're here for a debate between Gavin Hurleyman and Piper Tompkins. Is it Piper Tompkinson or?
Yep.
No, and the discussion is, does God exist? And Gavin's got the positive claim, obviously. He goes first. He's going to give a brief intro, and then Piper will. I won't interfere, by the way. 8-minute rounds, and 10-minute rounds. Sorry, and then we'll take it from there. When go on, Gavin.
Okay, so as most of you know, my name is Gavin. Big thanks to Bob for hosting the debate. This was a really last-minute thing, and Bob came through at the 11th hour and 59th minute because the other channel had a big drama and had to kind of reschedule, but Bob stepped up, so that was great. Just want to thank Piper for showing up. As you know, I've had trouble in the past with debate opponents either not turning up or turning up maybe half an hour late. It's amazing. So I appreciate the effort he's put in. And I'm stuck down here in New Zealand. It's just gone 11 a.m. on a Sunday morning. And beautifully fine day. And thank you again for everybody, especially to Bob and Piper.
Go on, Piper.
Yeah, hi, my name's Piper. I have a YouTube channel called Piper Tompkins. You just search it up in the search bar, you'll get it. It's mostly about politics, but I plan to do some stuff about philosophy at some point. So thanks to Bob for hosting, and thank you to Gavin for offering and participating, and thank you all for watching.
Right, go on. As soon as you start talking and you've had a swig of tea, let me know.
Yeah, can I just set my timer, Bob?
I've got one here.
Yeah, I want to set my timer as well, so
you can see how long.
Yes. Yeah, so I can see. I think I'm.
Sorry,
I think I'm under 10 minutes, but I just want to be sure. Right. Okay. So maybe just give us a bit of leeway on the time too, Bob. I mean, I'm not worried if Piper goes over by 1 or 2 minutes. So I'll start now. So
yeah.
Hi everyone. Tonight's debate is, does God exist? And I'm taking the affirmative position that the God of the Bible does exist. And my learned opponent, Piper, is taking the negative position, or the atheist position, that God does not exist. And that's fine, but unfortunately for my learned opponent, he's got a very difficult task, because the belief that God does not exist, or the statement God does not exist, is a negative existential proposition. Now, many negative existential propositions cannot be proven or validated, and this is one of them, which is not to say that not all negative existential propositions cannot be proven, because they can be. Like, I could say, I'm not black, and obviously I'm not black. So to say God does not exist is actually an impossible assertion or claim to try and validate. But as just a minute, as physicist Brian Greene writes, he says, underneath the molecules, atoms, and particles, there's another layer of reality that comes to light. It's a reality that is based on information. So the common thinking amongst many atheists and many lay people is that the universe is only tiny bits of matter, and all that exists is different arrangements of these particles that these particles are nothing more than the products of tiny atoms bouncing around, and the fundamental nature of the universe is solely material. And all we see and know is nothing more than an emergent feature of these tiny particles. But this is a concept that is actually not true, because physicists are seeing a different picture of reality. The old notions of physicalism and material reductionism are fading away, because our universe is not fundamentally material after all, is not fundamentally material, but is emergent. It's emergent from a more fundamental and deeper underlying reality. Space, time, and matter are not the foundation of reality, but an emergent construct of a deeper reality. And as Dutch theoretical and string theorist Herman Verlinde says, I'll quote him here, he says, I can't do a Dutch accent, but I'll quote him here. He says, in the future, at least, this development will be that we start actually with information. So information is going to be our starting point, and space-time is not something that we start with. We forget about what space is, and we forget about what time is. And by thinking about what information is doing, then the space-time will be what we call emergent, and will come out of just a bunch of ones and zeros. So in the hunt to rectify quantum mechanics with relativity, physicists about 2 decades ago, they discovered something known as the holographic principle. Now, the holographic principle is a theory that states that the entire 3-dimensional universe can be seen as 2-dimensional information. In other words, the whole 3-dimensional universe, the particles that make up reality, would emerge from underlying information processing in quantum field theory. And as American and Columbia University professor and chairman of the World Science Festival, physicist Brian Greene explains, the reason why I'm mentioning these guys' names is not to name drop, but to emphasize that these are not religious guys, they're not Christian guys, they're just physicists and scientists. But Brian Greene goes on to explain, science finally began to articulate this new principle, this holographic principle. And what it said is that all things that were falling inside a black hole were somehow captured in a preserved image at the event horizon itself. So if the information is not lost on the surface, the information is not lost on the inside, because they are equivalent. All the information about these objects, what they were like in their 3-dimensional existence, is encoded or smeared across the event horizon of the black hole, which is analogous to a hologram. Brian Greene goes on to say the 3-dimensional objects, us, everything in the world around us, all the information these objects have is carried and is smeared around a distant 2-dimensional surface that surrounds us. And we are in some sense just a holographic projection of that distant data. Now that sounds pretty much like the Matrix, and it would have remained that way, because it only worked, this holographic principle only worked in theory at first, because it didn't have any observable data to back it. But all that changed back in 2017, 2017, when a peer-reviewed paper, peer-reviewed study, and that's in my list of references, a peer-reviewed study by a research team headed by Drs. Ashforty, Coriano, Rose, Gordon, Skandaris, published observable evidence for the holographic principle. They tested the model against cosmological observations of the early universe and found that the holographic model is compatible with the data that is found in the cosmic microwave background radiation. From looking at irregularities in the background radiation, the research team found that simple equations in quantum field theory could explain almost all of the cosmological observations. It was also a marginally better fit than the standard model, where the Q of T becomes non-perturbative, and it could also explain other apparent anomalies. Anyway, what this means, what this word salad means is what is at first a three-dimensional reality evidenced in the cosmic microwave background radiation is an emergent informational construct, and observable evidence infers reality as we experience it is not fundamental, but emerges from the subatomic realm of quantum mechanics. Now, this paper correlates to another study in 2017 that was published by a research team headed by Drs. Ritchie, Selby, and Al Safdie. And what they demonstrated was quantum entanglement. And they set out to prove that quantum entanglement is an inevitable feature of reality. Entanglement happens when two particles that share a quantum state or wave function cannot be described independently or without the other. But if you were to separate these two particles, and experiments have been done doing this, particularly in Japan, where they've taken two particles that share a quantum state and separated them by up to 200 miles. And a change that is made to one particle has the instantaneous same change effect on the other particle. So theoretically, in theory, you could put one particle at one end of the universe and the other particle at the other end of the universe and make a change to one, and it would instantaneously affect the other and make the same change. So therefore, that effectively abolishes the time and space between them. So to quote the paper directly, the authors say, we show that any theory with a classical limit must contain entangled states, establishing entanglement as an inevitable feature of any theory superseding classical theory. In other words, any theory that purports to describe reality must include quantum entanglement. That's how we get mass, and from mass we get matter. So the information between them is not affected by space and time, which demonstrates that space and time is not fundamental for the underlying world of quantum mechanics, but is an emergent phenomena of the classical world that exists only after measurement. Now, this is really important. The classical world only exists after we decide to measure it. This is a hard thing to get our heads around, but it's actually true. Even in the words of Sean Carroll, who's a physicist, who's a favorite go-to guy for many non-believers, Sean Carroll says the following: whereas space is obviously, and he says obviously not fundamental, space is something where when you go from classical mechanics to quantum mechanics, space more or less just disappears. I've got a lot more from Sean Carroll, but for the sake of brevity, just check my time. How's my time going, Bob? Have I got 5 minutes to go? Bob. Anyway, I'll carry on.
Sorry. Yeah, I forgot to press the down on my time.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm almost finished. Anyway. Yeah. So I'll save the rest of what Sean Carroll was saying for the open discussion. So additionally, physicist Heinz Young states in his work, Emergent Space-Time, Reality or Illusion, ? And I'll quote him, he says, emergent space-time is the new fundamental paradigm for quantum gravity. But here is the deeper point to be made from what I've been talking about. Essentially, the classical world of reality emerges from the underlying information processing and the quantum wave function of quantum mechanics. Back in 2009, a Dutch physicist called Diederik Oertz, A-E-R-T-S, published a paper noting that our human cognitive processes can be, quote, and I'll quote him here, be readily modeled using the mathematical formalism of quantum mechanics, unquote. In other words, our inner world of thoughts, qualia, and emotions can be readily modeled in terms of Hilbert space and quantum processes. What this means is that our world of consciousness can be modeled via the study of quantum cognition. And just to make things nice and clear, quantum cognition is the field of study which applies to the mathematical formalism of human cognition processes like language, decision making, memory, concepts, conceptual reasoning, human judgment, and perception. So, quantum cognition study would suggest that emergent space-time would be virtually indistinguishable from the same properties of a mind. This data is backed up by the work of astrophysicist Franco Vasa and neurosurgeon Alberto Felitti on the similarities between the neural networks in the brain and the structure of galaxies, which is not kind of that unexpected, you know, if the universe is emergent from a mind. Now, as one of the fathers and pioneers of quantum mechanics, Max Planck, famously said, there is no matter. This is Max Planck back in 1944. He said, there is no matter as such. All matter originates and exists only by virtue of a force. We must assume behind this force the existence of a conscious and intelligent mind. This mind is the matrix of all matter. And this was part of a speech that Max Planck was giving called Das Wesen der Materie, which means the nature of matter, in Florence, Italy in 1944. So to basically sum up my argument with a formal representation, it goes like this. So premise one, the mind exists. Premise two, the properties of the mind are not that which matter can have. I don't think there's anything controversial about that. I'm probably going to get pushback from Piper about premise three, which is substance dualism is false, but I'm happy to argue that. So the conclusion is that all is mind, and theists, they call this superior mind or ultimate mind, they call that mind God. So I'll be arguing the emergent nature of space-time and matter from numerous areas via quantum mechanics, the holographic principle, Brian Whitworth's feature of virtual reality versus objective reality, Dr. Bernardo Kastrop's mental disassociation, and Professor Donald Hoffman's work that focuses on consciousness being all that there is at the very fundamental ground zero of the universe, and might even talk about some of the work from physicists Fred Alan Wolf and Leonard Susskind. So that's about me, and I'll yield my time there to my learned opponent. Thank you.
Right, let me know when you're ready. 10 minutes, isn't it, Gavin?
Yeah, more or less. I don't mind if he goes over a bit.
Oh, yeah. We're not going to be... yeah. When you're ready, Piper, tell us a bit about yourself and... oh, no, you already done that. So...
Yeah, just let me know. I'm ready. Just let me know when you start the timer so I can start mine.
Well, if you start talking, I'll press my timer.
Okay, so okay. So I'm going to be arguing for the position that God doesn't exist. And just to be clear, I'm not one of these people that Ozymandias Ramses has labeled lack theists. I'm not just saying that I lack a belief in God and I have to be convinced. I'm saying that I believe that God doesn't exist. And so I have an argument for that I'd like to present in my opening. I'm going to focus on this one argument for global atheism and naturalism. Global atheism is the position that nothing that can appropriately be called God exists. And naturalism is the position that all causal properties are natural. And if I have time, I'll get into another argument against classical theism. But anyway, so The argument for global atheism and naturalism goes as follows. Premise 1, the real world is the objective reality that human beings subjectively experience. Premise 2, all concepts of the supernatural and God are concepts of forces above the objective reality humans experience. Conclusion, all concepts of the supernatural and God are fictional concepts. So I want to first explain premise 2 a little bit. So again, premise 2 is all concepts of the supernatural and God are concepts of forces above the objective reality humans experience. Now, a theist might say, well, that's not really what I mean by supernatural or God. What I mean by supernatural or God is something like something you can't explain with the laws of physics. Now, I actually think that that's not going to cut it in terms of a lexical definition of supernatural, right? I don't think that's actually what people usually mean when they say supernatural. And the support I would give for that is what Bart Ehrman, the professor of religious studies and New Testament scholar, said in his debate on the resurrection of Jesus with his fellow New Testament scholar, Dr. Michael Licona. He described the ancient view of the supernatural as there being kind of just a realm above, a realm in the middle where the ancient people believed they lived, and then a realm below, right? And so they didn't have these concepts of physics and what can be explained with physical laws. So I think it would be best to talk about supernatural in terms of there existing other realms besides the realms that humans subjectively experience. Now, the first premise is, I think, what really the whole argument turns on. The real world is the objective reality that human beings subjectively experience. Now, I have an argument for that first premise. I call it the argument for subject-object ontology. A subject is something that has conscious experience, and an object is what is being consciously experienced by the subject. So the first premise is there are beings that have conscious experience, subjects. The second premise is conscious experience requires something to be experienced, an object. And the third premise is objects don't have to be subjects, but subjects have to be objects. Remember premises 1 and 2. So conclusion, all real things are either subjects or objects. Now let me look at how I'm doing on my time here. Okay, so I think I have time. So I'm going to
6.5 minutes, 7 minutes or so.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. So then I'll get into my argument against classical theism. Classical theism is basically the view that God is omnipotent, omniscient. There's one God that's omnipotent, omniscient, and all good. That created everything that is not himself, right? So this is my argument against classical theism. Premise 1, the God of classical theism purportedly created everything which exists apart from himself. Premise 2, the God of classical theism is a conscious being. Premise 3, consciousness requires experience. Premise 4, experience requires an object of experience, that which is experienced. Premise 5, the God of classical theism has no object of experience prior to creating everything that exists apart from him. So conclusion, the God of classical theism is a logical impossibility, meaning there's some contradiction on the concept. The contradiction I'm asserting exists on the concept of classical theism is that you have a conscious being that exists that created everything else, and that means that the conscious being, before the conscious being created everything else that is not it, had nothing to consciously experience. And yeah, I think I'm actually going to yield my time.
Well, that was quick.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Well, you got 4 or 5 minutes there, Piper. I mean, you know.
We could just add it to the open discussion. I'm fine with that.
Oh, okay. So this is 5-minute rounds, quick questions, clarification.
Now Bob, this is cross-examination or rebuttal time. So
Yeah.
each side gets up to eight minutes.
Okay.
Yeah. So on my first word, but hang on, I've got to get my right page. Okay. Dump. Give me a sec here, folks. thanks for that opening, Piper. That was pretty cool, man.
Yeah, thanks for yours as well.
Okay, so right. I cannot find this. Give me a sec here, folks.
Yeah, Piper, have you got those premises with your conclusion written out? Have you got
Yep,
it typed
I do.
out? So
Yeah.
show it on the screen, and I'd like to look at it myself sometime.
Yeah, that'll be helpful.
Yeah.
I can put it in the chat if that's okay.
Oh yeah, of course it is in the private chat. Yeah.
Sounds good.
All right. Okay, so almost there, folks. Just give us a sec. Oh, here we go. All right. So, Bob, can you start the timer now? Oh, can you start the timer now? Give me my 8 minutes. Yeah. Thanks for that, Piper. That was great. So I'm really glad you're not a lack theist, and you do honestly believe that God does not exist. And that's cool. And it seemed to me that you were arguing from global atheism and naturalism. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, fine. That's cool. When I do rebuttal and cross-examination, it's more of a back and forth kind of thing. So you were talking about how you didn't believe a supernatural realm existed, or a supernatural realm was false, or there was no evidence for a supernatural realm. Am I kind of on the right path?
Yeah, you are.
Okay, that's cool. There's I don't know if you've heard about these places. There's not many of them, but they're called like, for instance, in the University of Arizona, they've got a section called the Department of Perceptual Studies. There's another one in Arizona. There's one in Nevada, Las Vegas. There's one in Edinburgh. There's one in Amsterdam. And there's one in Lund University in Sweden. Now, they call themselves the Division of Perceptual Studies, and what they do is they investigate, and they rigorously investigate, things like near-death experiences, remote viewing, what's the other one on the top of my head? Is there life after death? Basically paranormal type stuff.
Parapsychology?
Kind of. But the reason why I'm mentioning these places is because, and in my list of references, you'll see there's a link there to it's a 1 hour panel discussion between four of these scientists from Division of Perceptual Studies in Virginia. So it's an hour long discussion, and they have an audience of scientists and medical professionals. But what they were doing was showing or demonstrating the evidence for why they believe, and these are scientists, these are not religious guys, right? Why they believe that there is that they are convinced from their research that there is life after death. There is existence after death. So because our physical body stops, operating in the natural world, there's that blur. There's that blur into the supernatural, and they just gave some really salient and kind of hard to argue points. So that's worth a look.
Sure.
Yeah, and with the God does not exist thing, I don't know. This has got to be. Would you agree that it's a negative existential proposition, that the claim that God does not exist?
Could you define negative existential proposition for me?
Well, existential has to do with existence, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, and a proposition is like a claim or a statement, and negative obviously is the opposite of positive. Positive, yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, I would agree.
Yeah. So how would you demonstrate or describe how God does not exist?
So that's kind of what I was trying to do with my argument. So for me, God is going to imply some kind of entity that doesn't exist in the reality that we humans experience. And I just take that to be synonymous with fictional.
Right. But how does that square, Piper, with the research from these scientists that work out of these places called divisions of perceptual studies?
Well, so what are they studying? What's the data there?
Well, I've already mentioned it. They study near-death experiences. They study remote viewing. They study. Yeah, they basically study the what's called what you and I would call the paranormal. And,
yeah.
I mean,
I've heard of things like that. I've heard of like parapsychology and so forth. I actually have a couple books on it, but I mean, the thing that I'd say about that is I'm not an expert on any of the scientific topics, right? So I have to go, if I'm going to be rational, right, I have to go with the consensus of scientific research. And I don't think the consensus of scientific research states that parapsychology or the paranormal are real phenomena, even if there are scientists who are contending that.
But this, okay, that's well, okay, I can push back against that. But the scientific consensus is that, and we're talking about physics here, particularly astrophysics.
Sure.
The scientific consensus amongst astrophysics is that space, time, and matter is not fundamental to the universe. That's not at the base level of the universe. And as Leonard Susskind, who's a really well-known physicist in the US, he says that the concept of space, time, and matter not being fundamental is he just calls it mainstream physics now.
Right.
So because space, time, and matter just disappears once we're in the realm of quantum mechanics, we're then starting to move and shift into the realm of metaphysics.
Right.
Would you agree with that?
That's actually what I was going to ask about.
Yeah.
I mean, it's your time to ask questions, so I'm not going to ask.
No, that's fine. So it seems that because science agrees that space, time, matter, those three things are not fundamental to the universe, that there's something much deeper that's underlying or at the bedrock of the universe. Dr. Bernardo Kastrup and Professor Donald Hoffman, they are more of the two kind of notable researchers who are dead set serious about at the very fundamental level of the universe is nothing but consciousness. But then that begs the question, doesn't it? Because consciousness doesn't just poof into itself, doesn't poof into existence by itself. Consciousness requires a mind. And then the question that is begging is, well, whose mind is it? And, the theist will say, well, we think it's the mind of God. So that's kind of where our position is.
Right. Yeah, I mean, so if we have a kind of metaphysical theory that says the best way to make sense of the data from quantum fields or whatever we want to say, right, is that consciousness is fundamental. So maybe some kind of idealism is true. The question that I would have about such a theory is, okay, so if consciousness is fundamental, then what is the consciousness that is fundamental experiencing?
The short answer to that, Piper, is what Hoffman, Kastrup, Brian Whitworth, Leonard Zuskin, Fred Alan Wolf. I'm just reeling off names off the top of my head. And remember too, these are not religious guys, they're just science guys. Yeah. What they think, their position is that the human brain, a human brain organ, it acts as a filter. It acts as a filter for our consciousness and our mind. That's the way they see it. Excuse me, Hoffman and Kastrup particularly of the opinion that everything is mental, and a little bit like the Matrix movie, and I'm not trying to sound too sci-fi here, but a little bit like the Matrix movie, reality is not actually what we see, and reality is not actually really what is there, but what we see is an interpretation or a filter from our brain organ to our mind and our consciousness. It's a pretty heavy kind of an out there kind of topic, but as being a theist, you can see why I'm fairly warm on it.
Right. Yeah.
rather than naturalism.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I get that kind of explanation. So I guess the difficulty that I have with it, right? So I mean, I'm actually not I'm fine with the idea that there is some kind of more, like, there's a more fundamental there's more to reality than just what we directly experience, right? Yes. So I'm fine with that. The thing that I get tripped up on is the idea that more would be some kind of consciousness, right? Because as I understand consciousness, it's some kind of experience, right? You're experiencing something in the world. And if consciousness is the world, right, then it seems like there's nothing for the consciousness that makes up the world to actually experience. And I would just take that to be a contradiction on the concept of consciousness.
Right. But you'd agree, we all experience consciousness, don't we?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is good discussion. I'm really enjoying this.
Yeah, me too.
So I don't know how we're doing for time, but here's some things to consider. And this is comparing physical realism alongside quantum realism.
Right.
So if we looked at the Big Bang, for example, I mean, I don't. You would believe the universe had a start, a beginning, would you? Like the Big Bang?
Well, I'm fine with saying that the Big Bang is the point at which our physics breaks down. I'm not I can't refute Sean Carroll's multiverse hypothesis. I mean, I think we just don't know.
Okay. Well, I subscribe to the Big Bang. I don't know if it was actually a bang, but there was certainly a start to the universe, because that seems to be the consensus amongst all physicists and scientists. So if we compare the physical reality of, you know, the Big Bang to quantum realism, the Big Bang, the universe began from nothing in a Big Bang that also made our time and space. But if we look at it through the lenses of quantum realism, we could rightfully say or refer to it as a boot up. The universe began when it booted up, which made our time and space. So I'm trying to compare our naturalistic view of things to like a quantum view of things, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen the debate that Sean Carroll had with William Lane Craig.
I have, but it was a long time ago.
Yeah. So Sean Carroll is a cosmologist or a physicist, and William Lane Craig is a philosopher, and he argues from the Big Bang that there had to be some kind of beginning of the universe that had a cause, right? So what Sean Carroll points out is that it's not really, like, if you're a physicist in the field, it's not really untenable for you to say that some concept of the universe was eternal, quote unquote, in some sense, or always existed or whatever, because it's just not really resolved what actually, quote unquote, came before the Big Bang, because our physics breaks down at that point. So I don't think like the Big Bang is going to be like a substantiation of a hard beginning to time or space or anything like that, to be honest with you.
Sure. I understand that. But are we agreed that the universe had a beginning? That at one stage there was no universe, and now there is a universe. So there had to be a beginning to the universe, to our universe.
So I will agree that the universe that we can describe with our physics, at one stage seems to dissipate, right? So it seems like we can go back to a certain point and describe things with our physics, and then at some point that breaks down. We can't do that anymore.
Sure. Do you think the universe is eternal or not eternal?
So if Sean Carroll's multiverse hypothesis is correct, then our particular universe isn't eternal, but some kind of multiverse would have probably always existed. What I would say, though, is I think that my philosophical opinion, anyway, is that there's a constant process of change that doesn't end or doesn't begin.
Sure. Okay, gotcha. So just to be clear, is Sean Carroll of the opinion that this universe of ours is not eternal?
He thinks his hypothesis, right, is that our particular universe is not eternal, but that there's a multiverse that spins out kind of all these different universes, and that multiverse always existed.
Okay, gotcha. I gotcha. Yeah, well, that would be in line with how I think about this universe, because it seems to me that the evidence from astronomy, astrophysics, physics, and all this kind of thing is pointing to our universe expanding. You know, with the redshift expanding.
Yeah.
And because it seems to us from a through the lenses of science, it seems that the universe had a start. It had a start, and it's expanding with the redshift expanding, which all points to the universe, our universe, not being eternal. So I'm in full agreement with you there. the theist has this position that, okay, we accept the Big Bang, we accept that the universe had a start, but we also would posit that at the start of the universe, the four fundamental forces, gravity, the electromagnetic force, the strong and weak nuclear forces, had to be present when the universe started. Otherwise, the universe would not have formed the way that it has. Now, science can tell us everything that happens from the particles that make up all of those fundamental forces onwards, but science can't tell us where those particles came from. And of course, the theist is going to say, well, the first verse of the Bible says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, because these quantum particles just can't make themselves, you know, they can't just come into existence by themselves. So that's the theist position.
Yeah, I mean, I think my position would be, I mean, so, I mean, it's kind of tricky for me, right? Because there's a debate in philosophy of science about scientific realism or scientific anti-realism, about whether or not our theories about these particles are actually saying these particles exist, or they're just positing the particles as a way to make sense of the phenomena that we observe with kind of large hadron colliders or whatever. But what I guess my position would be is that I think what exists is kind of in a process of change that doesn't end or doesn't begin. And so all the particular contingent things that we observe, right, those things are the results of that process of change, what Hegel called the process of becoming, right? So that would be my view as an atheist.
Yep. No, I hear what you're saying. We're kind of on the same wavelength. We're kind of on the same wavelength, but we're looking at it through different lenses, right? Because I'm looking at it through the lens of theism, through Christianity, and you're looking at it through the non-theist view, which is fine. It's totally fine.
Yeah.
So what are you? Okay, so I can understand where you would get the idea that God does not exist, but here's a difficult question, because the claim that God does not exist is a negative existential proposition. The only way to prove it or validate it would be to search the entire world and the entire universe to make sure you couldn't find God anywhere, which would be a fruitless effort anyway, because God's a spiritual entity. He's invisible, so you can never see him. So can you kind of see where the theist comes from when we hear the claim God does not exist? Well, how can you describe, or how can you explain how God does not exist?
Yeah, so I mean, I think it's a valid objection, right? Like, I think in terms of the question of whether God exists, right? It's a heavy question. And so even if you're taking if you're taking my position, which is that God doesn't exist, then someone could certainly make the valid objection that, well, but the world that we live in is really vast and really huge, right? So, how can we be sure that something like God doesn't exist, right? Now, I mean, the approach that I'm taking with it is I'm taking an approach based on a concept of logical possibility. So something is logically impossible if it requires a contradiction, right? A proposition and the negation of that proposition at the same time. So something like, we are having this debate and also not having this debate, right? That would be a contradiction. So that would be logically impossible, right? Logical possibility comes from the lack of a contradiction. So that we are having this debate is possible because there's no logical contradiction. So in my view, right, I think the idea of God isn't logically possible, because the idea seems to be that there is some conscious agent apart from the objective reality that human beings experience. And I think that's basically just synonymous with being fictional, right? So we're asserting a kind of abstract thing that necessarily exists in our minds as concrete, necessarily existing outside of our minds. And so I take that to be a contradiction.
Okay. So then, so Piper, how would you contend with the fact that space, time, and matter is not fundamental to our universe?
I'm actually completely fine with that. So the type of naturalism that I take isn't a physicalist type of naturalism, right? I think physics is just kind of a social construct that comes out of science, right? So I don't make some assertion that everything is material or physical, right? So I'm completely fine with space, time, and matter being emergent or something like that.
Right. So what do you think space, time, and matter is emergent from?
So if we have some substantiation of the idea, well, okay. So I think there is a natural world, and what I mean by that is that there is something that we are experiencing as human beings, right? Some object of our experience, right? And since I take what's called kind of an anthropological philosophy, I'm interested in how we as human beings directly relate to that world. And any kind of positing of something, the fundamental nature of that world or something beyond that world is just going to be abstract. It's not going to relate to our actual concrete experience. And so, in virtue of it being abstract, I think it's just going to be something that we're making up.
Okay. I'm not. Yeah. So it, just to be clear, so it's your position that whatever space, time, and matter emerges from is something that we as human beings are just making up?
No, what I'm saying is that there's something, right, that space, time, and matter come from, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if we want to assert the fundamental nature of reality, right, we have no way to experience that. And so it's just going to be abstract. It's not going to be a concrete thing that we're actually experiencing, right? And so ultimately it's just going to be made up, right? So I'm fine with saying there is something that that space, time, and matter come from. I would stop at the assertion that there is some fundamental substance of reality. That I think would be made up.
So what's your thoughts on consciousness being the base ground zero, like bedrock level of the universe, which is not a particularly popular view
Yeah.
with many physicists, but some are starting to lean in that direction. What's your view on that?
Sure. I guess, I mean, so it seems to me, right, that whatever we can say about consciousness, right, it's when we're talking about it, we're going to be talking about some kind of experience, right? And like, you know, there's the concept of qualia and philosophy of mind, what it's like, right, to have some experience, right? What something is like, what it's like to have this debate, what it's like to drink a soda, right? That kind of thing. And so it seems like if we're talking about consciousness, we're talking about experience, and experience is going to have something to be experienced, right? It's going to have some object, right? So I'm going to assert, but in virtue of that there always has to be some bedrock that a conscious thing, a subject, is experiencing, or else you can't have a subject. So I would negate all kind of assertions that consciousness is sort of metaphysically fundamental.
So sorry, you would assert that consciousness is. I
would negate all kinds of ideas that consciousness is metaphysically fundamental.
Okay, so you wouldn't agree with a position that asserts that consciousness is metaphysically fundamental.
Yeah, I would assert that's false.
Yeah, okay. All right. So that's interesting. That's really interesting. So, because space, time, and matter is not fundamental to the universe, this has been well documented and proven. Space, time, and matter has to emerge from something.
Right.
So, what would be your objection to space, time, and matter emerging from consciousness?
I actually might be okay with a version of that position. So I might say that I'm fine with the idea that space, time, and matter are constructs of the human experience, right? We use space, time, and matter to describe how we're experiencing our world, right? Our universe. That version of that position I'd be fine with. If the position, which I think is yours, that there's some consciousness beyond us that space, time, and matter is emerging from, if that's the position, then I would object to that.
Yeah. No, I understand that. So let's just focus. Let's just focus on your view, where you're happy with space, time, and matter emerging from a type, a model, a type, some kind of consciousness. Could you speak a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so there's a view in philosophy of science which is called scientific anti-realism, right?
Yeah.
So the idea is that objects which we can't directly observe, that we need some kind of instrument, or the only way. So things like subatomic particles, we can only observe through their effects when we look at a large hadron collider and so forth, things like this.
Yes.
And so those on the scientific realist view, those entities actually exist. On the scientific anti-realist view, those entities are just entities that we make up to explain the effects that we're seeing in, for instance, a large hadron collider. I take the scientific anti-realist view, so I'm fine with the idea that all the entities that we're positing in science, right, are descriptions of our experience of the universe and not some fundamental thing of reality.
Okay. So for the theist, and obviously you know where I'm heading with this, because for the theist goes along with physics in that space, time, and matter is not fundamental to the universe. We tend to align ourselves with researchers like Donald Hoffman and Leonard Susskind, Bernardo Kastrup. I'm trying not to sound like I'm name dropping, but it's hard not to, eh?
I mean, it's fine. It's fine if you want to cite scientific authorities.
Yeah. Because I'm not trying to drop names. I'm just saying that these are guys who are right at the cutting edge. But I'll just sidebar. I'll tell you something. This will make you laugh. Donald Hoffman is a professor at University of California. Now, he's very much into deep research about what is at the fundamental level of the universe. He's convinced himself that it's just consciousness. Now, he's very outspoken about this. However, 5 years ago, you never would have heard of Donald Hoffman. And you know why? Because he hadn't reached tenure yet. He still had a few years to go till he reached tenure. And as soon as he hit tenure, where he had a job for life and a paycheck for life, he just exploded onto the scene with his thoughts and theories about consciousness being the fundamental substrata or basement level of the universe. And he says that with quite a grin, because he's now free. He's now free to say whatever he thinks.
They can't get rid of him.
Yeah, they can't. No, they can't, because he's got tenure.
Yeah.
So, so he would have been really careful. He would have been really careful, not to say anything that would have, maybe isolated him.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, from the theist point of view, we align ourselves with science. You know, I'm not anti-science whatsoever. I think a good, well-rounded worldview is religion, philosophy, and science. They all complement each other, in my view, anyway. So, for the theist, the theist believes that God does exist simply because, you know, we are here and the universe is here, and the universe is intricately what's the word? I've just lost the word. Intricate, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah. And for the theist holds to the view that there cannot be an infinite regress going back over time. There has to be a non-contingent beginning, like to the universe. And the theist, you know, obviously believes that God created the universe and God created life and this kind of thing. And at the very foundation, because these non-religious scientists seem to be moving closer and closer and closer, albeit in small steps, you know, that consciousness is at the very bedrock level of the universe. And then, as I said before, that begs the question, well, consciousness doesn't appear by itself. It's got to be attached to a mind, if we're kind of thinking anthropomorphically. And the theist thinks, well, because consciousness is at the very bedrock level of the universe, that has to come from a mind, and that mind is what the theists, you know, refer to as God. So that's kind of where our argument comes from.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think might confuse some theists about atheists is that atheism is just kind of a belief in one proposition: God doesn't exist, right? And then you could have all sorts of worldviews that is attached to. So atheists could be dualists, atheists could be physicalists, naturalists, atheists could even believe in the supernatural, just not God, right? So
Sure.
So my particular view comes from the kind of German idealist position, and I'm not an idealist, but specifically, right, people like Hegel were dealing with a kind of philosophy called phenomenology, right, an investigation of the human experience, right? And so on that view, right, consciousness is going to be some kind of experience of something, right? And so if it's an experience of something, there has to be something below that consciousness is experiencing. And so from that point of view, consciousness kind of can't be metaphysically fundamental. It has to be a property of some broader metaphysical reality.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with you that consciousness is part of a metaphysical reality. Yes, I'd agree with you there.
Right.
Yeah, I'd agree. Hard case debate, eh? We're agreeing more than disagreeing.
Yeah. Well, that's a good thing. That means there's room for discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything you want to? You know, I've been firing questions at you. Do you want to ask me anything? You know, you can ask anything you like.
Yeah,
I don't mind.
I was interested in the argument that you gave at the end of your presentation. So correct me if I'm wrong. I didn't get a chance to write it down, but it was something like first premise, consciousness exists. Second, what was the second premise?
Oh, I'll repeat it for you. What I did was I put my argument into a simple syllogism. So premise one Premise one is the mind exists.
Okay.
And
premise two is
premise two is the properties of the mind are not. They're not that which matter can have.
right. Okay.
And the third one, which I'm kind of expecting some pushback from you, is that substance dualism is false. That's premise number three.
Mm-hmm. And
So
the
then
conclusion.
my conclusion is all is mind, and theists would call this superior or ultimate mind or non-contingent mind. They would just call this mind God.
So, if you don't mind me saying, I don't think actually that the conclusion follows, because there are more options than just substance dualism. There's property
Sure.
dualism. There's and there's also Russellian monism, and then there's my view, which is none of that.
Sure.
So I think, like, for that to get to that to the conclusion at the end of the argument, you would have to eliminate more than just substance dualism.
Sure.
Or you could just have an independent argument for idealism.
Yeah, I'm very sympathetic towards analytical idealism.
Right. Yeah, I don't know much about that. You could explain it if you want.
Analytical idealism is it's a form of idealism that all right. It's the form of idealism that Bernardo Kastrup adheres to.
Right.
I'll try and explain it. Excuse me. I'll try and explain it in as less words as I can.
Right. Yeah.
So Kastrup proposes that idealist ontology that makes sense of reality is a more parsimonious and empirically rigorous manner than mainstream physicalism. And when I say mainstream physicalism, I'm talking about materialist reductionism, which I don't think you subscribe to anyway, do you?
No, I don't.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. So, so Kastrup thinks that the idealist ontology is far more explanatory than materialist reductionism, bottom-up panpsychism, and cosmopsychism. The ontology proposed by Kastrup and his research team offers more explanatory power than other alternatives because it doesn't fall prey to the hard problem of consciousness or the combination problem or the decombination problem, respectively. Kastrup's thesis can be summarized as follows. Wow, I'm glad I made notes about this. Kastrup's thesis can be summarized as follows. And he believes there is only cosmic consciousness. This is a big claim. He proposes that there is only cosmic consciousness. Kastrup states that humans, as well as other living organisms, are but dissociated alters of cosmic consciousness surrounded by its thoughts. The inanimate world
Inanimate?
we see around us. Yeah. World we see around us is the extrinsic appearance of these thoughts. The living organisms we share the world with are the extrinsic appearance of other dissociated alters. Kastrup presents his thesis logically, conclusively, and clearly to the extent that we can assume that materialism or physicalism and all its variations which in some areas is still considered scientific in ideological studies, is fundamentally refuted, and its suitability as a scientifically meaningful explanatory principle for the comprehensive of the world of reality is disproven. That's it. That's it.
Yeah. That reminds
That's what I
me
wrote
of
down.
that reminds me of the 18th century empiricist philosopher George Berkeley's view. He was also a Christian theist. He basically, so he was empiricist. So he said, okay, the main epistemic tool that we have, the main tool for getting to knowledge of the world, is our direct kind of experience, sense experience, right? The way that our consciousness takes the world in, right? And so because of that, he asserts that since our main epistemic tool is going to be our consciousness has to be the foundation of reality. And then he goes on to argue for God, because he basically states that all of our individual consciousnesses are produced kind of, like you said, kind of disassociated from a larger kind of conscious thing, right? A larger kind of conscious being. So it reminds me of that view.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, I guess, like I've said this before, but I guess my main difficulty with views like that is if we're saying that consciousness is reality, right? Then it seems like a contradiction is going to be entailed, because I understand consciousness as some kind of experience of something, right? And so if there's an experience of something, there needs to be a something to experience, right? That is bedrock below the experience, right?
Yeah. I'm with you. What's your thoughts? What's your thoughts on the brain, our brain organ inside our skull, acting as a filter for reality?
Yeah, I mean, so the atheist kind of materialist philosopher of mind, Daniel Dennett, actually takes that view. He thinks that consciousness is kind of like a software, right? That simplifies all this information that we're taking in such a way that we can understand or navigate the world. So he thinks it's kind of like a filter. And I mean, I think, regardless of whether I don't subscribe to his materialism, but I do think he's right that our brains simplify the larger reality for us. So I do think there is a filtration going on there.
Right. Okay. Yeah. See, I would agree with you. So we're on the same page there.
Yeah.
But tell me what you think about this. And this is a bit off topic. Oh, yeah, it probably is. But it seems to me that there's been three major events that have happened in our history that has in a way shaped our society and shaped our civilization, maybe not for the benefit or for something better. And just bear with me, because prior to the Enlightenment period, the role of the family, the role of the individual in the family was, highly valued. Everybody was a cog in a wheel, and the wider extended family was really important. No less because the biggest concern at that time, in those times, was like war and famine, So it seems to me that the three major events that have perhaps not changed us, I mean, there's pros and cons on both sides, but I'm just looking at the con side of it. so the three major events would be the Enlightenment period, then the Industrial Revolution, and then what we refer to as like postmodernism, which is like from the 1940s onwards. Now, the only reason I say this is because prior to the Enlightenment period, people, I mean, they weren't as technologically savvy as we are today, but people looked to something outside of themselves, as like the ultimate arbiter or the ultimate judge. And it seems to me, this is solely my thoughts, I'm not quoting anybody. It seems to me that the Enlightenment period started to turn people's attention away from themselves and more back to themselves, almost like they had the ultimate knowledge or the ultimate arbiter of justice. And then we had the Industrial Revolution, which further kind of increased our technology. And we built ships that we believed that were unsinkable. Well, that was put to rest. And then from the 1940s onwards, we had the terrible disaster and human carnage of World War II. And from the 1940s onwards, we went through the period, of the hippies and all those kinds of things, the Beatles, this kind of thing. And people were now starting to look inwards to themselves for answers, instead of previously, prior to the Enlightenment, looking outside of themselves to the God of the Bible. So I'd just be interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm actually really interested in kind of a lot of those subjects. That's actually the main thing that I usually talk about in the content that I make. I talk about like politics and stuff. I haven't gotten to talk about a lot of philosophy yet, hopefully in the future. But yeah, I mean, so I think, so if you go if you go as far back in human history as we can go, right? Do you accept evolution? Like biological evolution?
Yes, but not the Darwinian type.
Okay.
But yes, I do accept evolution, just not the Darwinian type.
Okay. Well, so if we go back to the point, right, where we have the emergence of Homo sapien, right? The other kind of, you might not accept that human beings are a kind of ape, but on my view at least,
Sure,
the other
yeah,
kind of
yeah.
apes have dominance hierarchies. Whoever's physically fit, like basically physically controls everybody else.
Yep.
And human beings got around that by resisting it, developing things like spears that you could throw at a distance and cooperating with each other, right? To kind of overthrow the strongest guy, right?
Sure.
And then what happened is and this is from what we can tell from the anthropological evidence, is what kind of happens is once we overthrow kind of the physical dominance hierarchies, then you have a development of social hierarchies based on, the kind of tribal shaman leader, right?
Yeah.
And
yep, gotcha.
So because of that, you have this idea that the shaman gets his authority because he can tap into some other realm that exists, right?
Yeah.
And then as agriculture develops, you have the ability to construct these more elaborate systems of belief. You have rulers saying that, justifying their rule, saying that they are gods or they're ordained to rule by the gods. And then that kind of, and then you have then you have the emergence of the missionary religions, so Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam. And they're missionary religions because they preach universal salvation and they want to go out and tell people that if they subscribe to the religion, they can be saved, right? So as a result, so the theme that I see, right, is that these religious belief, people's belief that they are constrained by some higher power, morally or kind of metaphysically, right? That comes from, in my view, the way societies are organized on Earth, right? Societies are organized in such a way that people come to believe those things. And so the kind of, I think now, so what you're kind of pointing to is what modernity has done to religion, right? Religion kind of first became kind of modernist. It kind of shrunk away from public life, and it became a matter for people's private lives. And then after World War II, in the so-called postmodern period, a lot of religious people have taken on this idea that, well, my religion is my personal truth. It's not true for everybody else, just true for me. And so the kind of point that I would underscore there is these are all developments that are happening in how human beings are relating to each other, right? You have the development of science, you have the development of kind of representative democracies, you have the Enlightenment, which leads to people thinking that they have to use their rational minds to evaluate the truth of claims, right? And so I see all the things that you were just talking about as the development of human societies and human relations.
Okay. Interesting. Bob, are you still awake? Bob's in the UK, and I know it must be really late for him.
Yeah.
Bob.
You there, Bob?
Bob. he might be asleep.
Yeah.
He might be asleep.
Yeah.
Bob, are you there? Oh, I think he's probably asleep.
Yeah.
Okay. It's been really good. It's been really good chatting, eh? It's been awesome.
Likewise.
I really appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Would you be, Piper, would you be open in the future to like further debates about things? Like, I'd love to debate, maybe the resurrection or miracles or something like that, in the future.
Yeah, I'd be open to doing that.
Okay, that's awesome, man. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Okay, so I guess we'll I'll be happy to call this an honourable draw. What do you think?
Sounds good to me.
Okay. All right, man. Appreciate your time. Let's catch up later.
Yeah.
Let's catch up later.
Yeah.
Okay. Cheers. Cheers, man.
Cheers. See ya.
Ciao. Okay, folks. It seems like Bob's fallen asleep. What a bummer. But that's okay. I don't know how to rouse him. But thank you for listening. Might not have been everybody's cup of tea, but it just goes to show you that two people can have opposing views but still conduct themselves appropriately in the right manner. Bob, are you awake? Calling Bob. Calling Bob. Calling Bob. I think Bob is snoozing. As I undo my bits and pieces here. Because I don't have mod rights, I can't open up the link. So all I can say is thank you to everybody that tuned in, and thanks to Bob who at the very last minute was more than happy to host this debate because our original host had a major disaster on his hands. So good on Bob. Don't forget, there is a debate coming up somewhere around the 20th of September, and this debate is a tag team debate between Crimson Air, myself, and Vikal and Kevin. And the topic, I think, is John chapter 10 with an emphasis on conditional security and eternal security. So that will be one to watch. Looking forward to that. So I'm going to sign off now and say good night and God bless to everyone. Cheers.